Frost Hollow was a town trapped in winter's arms. Snow blanketed the cobbled streets year-round, clinging to rooftops and piling up against doorways. Even in summer, when the sun should have melted the ice, the town remained a frozen cradle, quiet and still. At the edge of Frost Hollow stood a thin, crooked house. Its windows were always shut tight, and the smoke from its chimney rose in a single, narrow thread. Inside lived Lena Carter, a small girl with wide gray eyes and a heart too heavy for her 7 years. Lena had once known warmth. She remembered it faintly, the deep voice of her father, the scratch of his beard against her cheek, the way he laughed even when the snowstorms howled. But he was gone now, taken by a sickness that no doctor in Frost Hollow could cure. In his place was Lydia Carter, Lena's stepmother. Lydia was a sharp woman, with a face that seemed permanently pinched by disapproval. She had married Lena's father for reasons no one talked about. When he died, she had stayed, not out of love for Lena, but because the house was paid for, and she had nowhere better to go. To Lydia, Lena was a burden, a shadow in the corner, a mouth to feed, a name she barely spoke. Their home was cold not just because of the endless winter outside, but because there was no love within its walls. Lena learned early to be quiet, to be small, to be invisible. Still, there were moments, tiny, stubborn moments, when her spirit stirred, refusing to be completely buried under frost and silence. One of those moments came on the last Sunday before the New Year. The town's annual snow market had opened. Stalls lined the square, draped in fairy lights, selling everything from steaming mugs of cider to hand-knit scarves. Children darted between booths, their laughter filling the frozen air. Lena wandered the market alone, her boots crunching softly on the packed snow. Lydia had sent her out to fetch bread, shoving a few coins into her hand with a clipped order not to dawdle. Lena moved carefully through the crowd, clutching her thin coat tighter around her. Her coins jingled in her pocket, the sound sharp against the muffled hum of the market. As she passed a cluttered stall near the end of the square, one selling old toys and cracked pottery, she heard it. A whimper, soft, pitiful. She turned. At the very back of the stall, half hidden under a sagging table, sat a small bundle of fur, golden, trembling, eyes wide and pleading. A puppy. He was filthy, his fur matted with snow and mud. His tiny ribs showed through his thin sides. He shivered uncontrollably, paws tucked close to his body as if trying to make himself disappear. No one seemed to notice him. No one seemed to care. Lena knelt down slowly. The puppy flinched at first. Then, seeing the gentleness in her movement, crept forward a few inches. His nose was cold against her hand. "Hey there," she whispered. The puppy licked her fingers weakly. She glanced around. The vendor manning the stall was busy arguing with a customer over the price of a chipped vase. No leash, no box, no sign the puppy belonged to anyone. Heart thudding, Lena slipped her coat open and scooped the little creature inside. He was so light it startled her. Barely more than a whisper of life. She zipped the coat closed, feeling the warmth of him against her chest. "You're coming home with me," she breathed. The coins for the bread clinked again as she ran. But she didn't stop. She didn't dare. She darted through the maze of stalls, through the swirling snow, and out into the empty side streets leading back to the crooked house. By the time she pushed open the door, her lungs were burning from the cold. Inside, the air was still and bitter. Lydia sat by the fireplace, knitting something dark and ugly. Her face pinched even tighter than usual. "You're late," she snapped without looking up. "Where's the bread?" Lena hesitated, coat still bulging with hidden life. I dropped the coins," she mumbled. Lydia shot her a glare sharp enough to slice through skin. "Useless," she muttered. "Can't even do a simple thing right." Lena kept her head down, moving quickly up the narrow stairs to her small attic room. Once inside, she closed the door, pressing her back against it. She waited, heart pounding, until she was sure Lydia wasn't following. Then she unzipped her coat. The puppy blinked up at her, dazed but alive. Lena smiled, a real smile, small and trembling, but real. She grabbed an old, fraying blanket from the foot of her bed and made a nest in the corner. She placed the puppy gently inside. He curled up instantly, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. "I'll call you Rusty," she whispered, "because you're not shiny new like the others. But you're mine." Rusty's tail thumped once, weak but sure. Lena sat cross-legged beside him, her fingers stroking his soft ears. For the first time in what felt like forever, the cold in the little attic room seemed to lift. Just a little. Outside, the snow kept falling, the wind kept howling. But inside, two lost souls, one girl, one pup, had found each other. And somehow, in the heart of endless winter, the tiniest ember of warmth began to glow. For 2 days, Lena and Rusty lived in secret. She fed him crumbs from the kitchen, smuggled in scraps of old blankets to make his nest warmer, and whispered stories to him late into the night while the wind clawed at the attic windows. Rusty seemed to grow stronger with each passing hour. His ribs were still visible, but his tail wagged more often, and he followed Lena around her tiny room with clumsy devotion. For Lena, it was like waking from a long, cold dream. She had someone, to love again. But nothing good stayed hidden in Frost Hollow for long. On the third afternoon, Lydia stormed up the stairs. The house had been too quiet for her liking. The door burst open with a bang, slamming against the cracked wall. Lena jerked upright from where she sat on the floor. Rusty, startled, gave a tiny bark and scuttled behind her. "What is that?" Lydia's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Lena scrambled to shield Rusty with her body. "He's mine, please. He's just a puppy. He doesn't hurt anything. He's good." Lydia's face twisted in fury. Her knitting needles clattered to the floor as she marched forward. "I told you. No pets. No mess. No extra mouths to feed. He's not messy. I'm taking care of him. I'll feed him from my share," Lena pleaded, voice shaking. But Lydia wasn't listening. With a speed Lena didn't expect, Lydia grabbed Rusty by the scruff of his neck. The puppy yelped in fear, legs scrabbling in the air. "No!" Lena screamed. lunging forward, but Lydia shoved her back with a rough hand. "You selfish, ungrateful little brat," Lydia hissed. "Bringing filth into my house? After everything I've done for you." Lena scrambled to her knees. Hands clasped. "Please, please don't hurt him. He's all I have." Lydia's eyes were cold, hard stones. Without another word, she turned, storming down the stairs, Rusty dangling helplessly in her grip. Lena chased after her, stumbling, tears blinding her. Outside, the storm had grown furious. Snow battered the streets, swirling in thick, violent sheets. The town was a ghost. The market stalls abandoned, the lamps barely visible through the whiteout. Lydia flung open the door. Lena screamed again, but it was too late. With a vicious motion, Lydia hurled Rusty out into the storm. His small body hit the snow with a soft thud, barely making a dent in the thick drift. The puppy tried to get up, whining in confusion. The door slammed shut behind him. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then Lena moved. She didn't think, she didn't even feel the cold yet. She just ran, barefoot, wearing only a thin, warm sweater. She threw herself outside, the wind howling instantly around her, freezing her skin raw. "Rusty!" she cried, stumbling through the snow, her toes sinking deep into the icy ground. The little puppy lay curled up a few feet away, shivering violently, too weak to move. Lena scooped him into her arms, pressing him against her chest. His tiny heart hammered wildly against her ribs. The cold bit deep, gnawing at her fingers, slicing through her sweater like knives. Snow stung her eyes, turning her tears to ice. She turned back toward the house, but the door was shut. The lights inside already snuffed out. There would be no help from Lydia. The town was deserted, no warm shops, no friendly hands reaching out. It was just her and Rusty against the storm. "Hold on," she whispered, her lips barely moving. "Hold on, Rusty." She tucked him tighter under her chin, shielding him as best she could. She had to find shelter. Somewhere, anywhere. Lena staggered forward, her bare feet sinking deeper into the drifts. Each step was harder than the last. The cold wrapped around her like chains, pulling her down. But she didn't stop. Rusty whimpered once, a tiny sound of trust and fear. "I won't let you go," Lena gasped, barely audible over the storm. "I promise." The world blurred, snow and wind and darkness blending into one endless wall. Lena's arms trembled under Rusty's weight. Though he was so light he barely weighed anything at all. Somewhere deep inside her, a fire flickered, small, stubborn, the same fire that had made her pick up a shivering puppy from the market square. She would not let it go out. Not now. Not ever. The storm screamed louder. Snow whipped across the fields in wild, blinding gusts, swirling into shapes that clawed at Lena as she stumbled forward. Her bare feet were long past pain, her thin sweater soaked and useless against the cold. Rusty shivered violently against her chest. His tiny body pressed so close she could feel his heartbeat faltering. Weaker and weaker, Lena knew they couldn't make it much further. Her legs buckled. She fell to her knees in the deep snow. clutching Rusty tight. For a moment, she just knelt there, the world spinning in a haze of white and gray. She had to protect him. She had to keep her promise. With trembling hands, Lena struggled out of her last piece of warmth, the tattered coat she wore over her sweater. The wind tore at it as she pulled it free, trying to rip it from her grasp, but she clung to it stubbornly, gritting her teeth against the icy gusts. Gently, she wrapped the coat around Rusty's tiny, shaking form, tucking him in as tightly as she could. She pulled the sleeves around him, covering his paws, his belly, even his little nose. Rusty whimpered once, then went still, sensing her nearness, sensing her love. Without a second thought, Lena curled her body around him, shielding him with her own small frame. She pressed her forehead against his covered side, wrapping her arms tighter around the bundle in the coat. Snow piled around her, sticking to her hair, clinging to her sweater, dusting her eyelashes. The cold pressed in, merciless and sharp, but Lena barely noticed it now. All she could think about was Rusty. "Please," she whispered, her lips stiff and cracked. "Please stay." She squeezed her eyes shut, as if by sheer force she could will the storm away. She had no home, no family that would look for her, no warm bed waiting. All she had was Rusty. And she wasn't going to lose him too. The snow howled around them. Endless, vast. Lena's small body was just a tiny dot against the endless white, a speck of defiance. A flag planted in the heart of winter itself. Her coat, wrapped around Rusty, fluttered slightly in the wind like a battered banner. The storm roared, but Lena did not move. She stayed there, trembling, holding Rusty close, protecting him with the only thing she had left, herself. She prayed, not with words, but with every beat of her tiny, stubborn heart. "Please let him live. Please let him be warm. Please don't take him away too." Hours could have passed, or minutes. Lena couldn't tell any more. Her thoughts slowed. Her breathing grew shallow. The cold seeped into her bones, heavy and final, but still she held on. Somewhere, deep inside the raging storm, a light flickered, small but determined, and refused to go out. Lena's body sagged forward, exhausted. Her arms tightened one last time around Rusty before her strength gave out. She let her head rest gently against the snow. The world grew quiet, and in the heart of that terrible, endless storm, a little girl and a tiny, trembling pup fought together against the darkness, side by side, refusing to let go. Through the blur of snow, a figure watched from the window of a small bakery. Blake Harper stood there, a thick wool sweater pulled over his tall frame, a frown creasing his weathered face. He had been locking up for the night when he spotted something strange out in the white, something that didn't move with the wind. At first, he thought it was just a pile of forgotten cloth, blown out of the market square. But then he saw a flash of golden fur. A child. Without thinking, Blake grabbed a heavy blanket from the coat rack, yanked open the bakery door, and plunged into the storm. The wind hit him like a wall. He staggered forward, boots crunching through the deep snow. Each step a battle. He kept his eyes locked on the tiny figure ahead. barely visible under the fluttering coat. When he reached them, his heart twisted painfully. A little girl, no older than 7, lay curled tightly around a small bundle, a puppy, wrapped in the last piece of clothing she had. Her arms were locked protectively around the animal, her face pale and dusted with frost. Blake dropped to his knees beside them. "Hey, kid," he said urgently, shaking her shoulder gently. "Hey, stay with me." The girl didn't stir. The puppy gave a faint, shivering whimper. Blake didn't waste a second. He wrapped the heavy blanket around both of them, scooping them up into his arms. The girl was light, frighteningly so, and the puppy barely added any weight. "You're all right now," he muttered, shielding them with his body as he turned back toward the bakery. The warmth hit him like a wave as he stumbled inside, kicking the door shut against the storm. He carried them straight to the hearth, where a fire crackled and snapped in the stone fireplace. Gently, Blake set the girl down on a thick rug before the flames, tucking the blanket tighter around her and the little dog. He grabbed another quilt from the back of the shop and laid it over them, rubbing their arms and sides briskly to coax warmth back into their frozen bodies. The puppy, Rusty, stirred first. He gave a soft, broken whine and tried to lift his head. "That's it," Blake encouraged. "Come on, little guy. You're safe now." Rusty blinked blearily up at him, then nestled deeper into the girl's chest. Blake hurried to the kitchen, pouring milk into a shallow dish and setting it by the fire. He filled a mug with hot cocoa, the rich smell of chocolate filling the cozy shop. When he returned, the little girl was stirring, her eyelids fluttering open. Her first reaction was pure fear. She bolted upright, clutching Rusty close, her eyes wide and wild. "I'm sorry," she gasped hoarsely, shivering. "Please don't hurt him. I'll leave. I swear." Blake knelt in front of her, his face kind, his hands empty and open. "Easy now," he said gently. "No one's hurting anyone. You're safe here, all right?" The girl stared at him, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. Rusty whimpered in her arms, as if sensing her fear. Blake smiled and held out the mug of cocoa. "Here, drink this. It'll help." She hesitated, eyes flickering between the mug and the door, as if still expecting someone to storm in and yank her away. But the warmth of the fire, the softness of the blanket, and the steady, patient look in Blake's eyes finally reached her. Slowly, she reached out with shaking hands and took the mug. It was warm against her frozen fingers. She lifted it to her lips and sipped. The heat spread through her mouth, down her throat, filling her tiny, battered body with a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. Safety. Rusty gave a soft, contented sigh and curled tighter against her. Blake sat back on his heels, watching them with a gentle smile. "Name's Blake Harper," he said. "I run the bakery just down the street. What's your name, kid?" She looked up at him over the rim of the mug, cautious but curious. "Lena," she whispered. "And this is Rusty." Blake chuckled quietly. "Good names. Strong names." Lena took another sip of cocoa, her hands steadying slightly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The storm raged outside. the wind battering the windows. But here, by the fire, there was only warmth and quiet. Blake studied her small frame, the bruises of cold on her skin, the raggedness of her clothes. He didn't need to ask where she had come from. In a town like Frost Hollow, everyone knew who lived where, and who had a reputation for cruelty. He didn't press her with questions. He just poked the fire, tossed another log on, and said, "You're welcome to stay here for as long as you need." Lena's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "But, won't I be in the way?" Blake's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Not a chance. I've got plenty of room. And besides," he nodded at Rusty, who was now fast asleep, his nose twitching, "I could use a good watchdog." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena let out a tiny, shaky laugh. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. She tucked herself tighter into the blanket, sipping her cocoa, feeling the fire seep into her bones. Rusty twitched in his sleep, his little paws batting the air. Outside, the blizzard howled, but inside, hope flickered to life again, fragile but stubborn, burning bright against the cold. And for the first time in a long time, Lena believed she might finally have found her place. Home. The days that followed were a blur of warmth and change. Blake Harper didn't waste time. After the storm passed, he spoke to the town council, to the mayor, and to the constable. Frost Hollow was a small place, and it didn't take much to uncover what had been happening behind the closed doors of the crooked house on the edge of town. Stories came out, whispers of a cold woman, a neglected child, a house where no visitors were ever welcome. Blake didn't tell everything Lena had suffered. He didn't need to. The bruises, the malnourishment, the simple terror in her eyes when she thought she might be punished, all of it spoke louder than words. The authorities visited Lydia Carter soon after. She was furious, of course, screeching about ungrateful brats and liabilities as she was led away. But no one listened this time. Frost Hollow was a cold town by nature, but even it had a sense of right and wrong. Lena would never have to return to that house again. Standing outside the town hall the day the papers were signed, Blake knelt down in front of her, his big hands gentle on her thin shoulders. "You're safe now," he said simply. "If you want, you can stay with me. For good." Lena blinked at him, hardly able to believe it. "You mean, live with you? Forever?" Blake smiled, crinkles forming around his warm brown eyes. "If that's what you want. You, and Rusty too." At the sound of his name, Rusty barked once, a happy, sharp sound, and wagged his tail so hard his whole body wiggled. Lena looked at Rusty, she looked at Blake, then she threw her arms around Blake's neck in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked him over. Blake chuckled and hugged her back carefully, feeling how small she was, how much she had carried on such tiny shoulders. "Welcome home, kid," he said, his voice thick. And home it was. The little bakery became a place of laughter and light. Lena helped Blake roll out dough and dust pastries with sugar. Rusty snoozed under the counter or scrambled after crumbs Lena, accidentally, dropped. At night, after the last loaves were pulled from the ovens and the shop door was locked. They sat by the fireplace. Rusty sprawled between them. Sometimes Blake told stories about when he was young, about faraway places he had seen, and Lena listened, her head resting on Rusty's back, a smile playing on her lips. There were no shouted orders, no cold silences, only warmth, only love. Christmas came and went, but the lights Blake strung across the bakery windows stayed up all year round, casting a soft glow into the snowy streets. Lena hung her own drawings in the shop, crooked little pictures of Rusty, of the bakery, of three figures holding hands. Family. One evening, months later, Lena stood outside the bakery, watching the snow fall gently in the twilight. It was still cold. The winters of Frost Hollow were as fierce as ever. But inside her chest, something had changed. She was no longer the lonely girl staring out from frosted windows, longing for something she couldn't name. She was no longer the child curling into herself against the endless cold. She had Rusty. She had Blake. She had a home. Rusty trotted up beside her, bumping her leg with his nose. She smiled and bent down, ruffling his golden fur. "Come on," she said, her voice light. "Time to go in." They pushed open the bakery door, and the warm, buttery smell of fresh bread washed over them. Blake stood behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron, a smudge of flour on his cheek. "Perfect timing," he said, grinning. "Hot cocoa's ready." Lena laughed, a real laugh, bright and clear, and ran to him, Rusty close on her heels. Blake handed her a steaming mug, and together, they settled by the fire. Outside, winter ruled the land, fierce and cold, but inside, in a small bakery in the heart of Frost Hollow, a little girl's heart, once nearly frozen solid by loss and loneliness, burned bright and warm. It was true, Lena thought as she sipped her cocoa and watched Rusty doze by the hearth. Winter could be brutal, and storms could be cruel. But even the coldest winter was no match for a heart that fought for love. One small, stubborn heart could melt even the harshest snow. And sometimes, when you least expected it, love, real, lasting love, could find you in the storm and carry you home. Forever.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.